Mr. Chairman, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Good to be with you. Sorry, we're a little late running here on vote. We have votes going on, so.
I know. I was saying to our audience there that, as usual, there are votes that are coming and going, but thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time, certainly. This is an awfully busy time for all of you senators right now. I can imagine the pressure you're under. And I want to thank you for being a friend of the American Jewish Congress for all of these years and a strong supporter. I first met the senator when he was a congressman, and I remember the first event you joined us at back then when you were a congressman. He's been a good friend ever since. Mr. Chairman, there are a lot of critical issues facing the Jewish community today. Anti-Semitism, Iran, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, domestic terrorism, what's going on in social media, and I can go on and on. And so we look forward to hearing your thoughts on at least some of these issues, given the limited amount of time. But I do want to let everyone here know that if you don't know the senator, he has been a strong and consistent ally of the Jewish community throughout the years. You could always go to him to support, and we can count on him in the future as well. The senator is chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He is the most influential voice in the Senate right now, one of the most influential voices in the country. And he has been a leader on the support of Israel, on imposing sanctions on Iran, trying to stop the nuclear advancement by Iran, and sanctions on Hamas and Hezbollah, amongst other things. So, Senator, we thank you for being a friend of Israel, for being a friend of the Jewish community. I'm not going to go on much longer because we're limited on time and everybody wants to hear from you as opposed to me. So let me turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Jack. And let me thank you and all of those on this call for their dedicated advocacy. The work that you do goes far beyond the Jewish community in Israel, and I appreciate that. And I certainly appreciate, on a personal basis, the warm friendship that you and I have. The American Jewish Congress's mission is rooted in the same values that I believe should drive our foreign policy, which is fundamental democratic values like civil rights, human rights, freedom of speech and religion. And of course, when it comes to the Middle East, strengthening Israel's place in the world and combating anti-Semitism in all of its forms. We've seen all recent past presidents try in various ways to pivot away from the Middle East, whether it's to focus more on domestic issues or to reorient our foreign policy towards China and Asia. And yet, we just can't seem to tear ourselves away because our interests in the Middle East run so deep. I don't need to remind you all that the last president's mercurial behavior, shall we say, left some of our most important partners concerned about the strength of the United States' commitment. And I'm also keenly aware that President Biden's handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan has left some of those same partners a little bit on edge as well. At the end of the day, as I meet foreign leaders, from across the globe as well, in their countries or here in DC, I've said to them, at the end of the day, the United States has and will continue to have an important national security priority in the Middle East. We have longstanding partnerships and alliances, and I believe we need to reassure our allies that we are going to continue to be a partner and a force for good. I do believe that at this moment, we have a unique opportunity to reorient our posturing, an opportunity to reinvigorate our diplomacy in a region where our policy is too often driven by our military presence. Make no mistake, we have to continue to maintain and strengthen critical security and military partnerships, including, of course, with the State of Israel and with our partners in the Gulf and beyond. But America's influence in the world has never been driven by the strength of our military alone. We have so much more to offer diplomatically, economically, and culturally for the benefit of all those who dream of a brighter future throughout the Middle East. In places like Iraq and Lebanon, for example, we know that individuals, communities, and businesses are desperate for an American education, interested in American culture, and enthusiastic about forming relationships with American companies. We need to more fully invest in the aspirations of these communities. However, we cannot fully engage our resources without a fully staffed diplomatic corps. If any of you regularly tune into C-SPAN, you may be aware that we have a serious backlog of ambassador nominations, not just in the Middle East, but across the world. For the United States to pursue our interests and advance our values, we need empowered diplomats in place. And we have many highly qualified State Department and USAID nominees being held up for purely political reasons. And while I'm not particularly worried about the strength of our relationship with Israel, it would serve both countries better to have Tom Nides confirmed and on the ground. I believe that we can build on the Abraham Accords and support more countries normalizing diplomatic relations with Israel. But again, we need empowered diplomats in places to drive these objectives. I would, however, like to make 2 points clear. First is that new diplomatic relationships with Israel cannot be a tacit giveaway for a sophisticated American weapons system. And second, while we celebrate these historical achievements, we cannot overlook the fact, as we tragically saw last May, that Israel's core security threats remain unresolved. We cannot let up our pressure on Hamas and Hezbollah, who continue to threaten Israel, and in the case of Hezbollah, destabilize the entire region, which is why I will be on the floor in a little while, asking for unanimous consent to restore, to add $1 billion to the Iron Dome defense system. But what also makes me think about these challenges is, of course, Iran. As you, most of you, I think, probably know, I was staunchly opposed to the JCPOA because I did not believe it significantly constrained enough of Iran's nuclear program for long enough or addressed the destabilizing activities across the region. At the same time, I did not support the way in which the Trump administration unilaterally withdrew with no plan for what should come next. Maximum pressure is a tactic, not a strategy. And it's fair to say that we are far worse off now than when we were when the Trump administration withdrew. Iran has increased research and development and is working with more advanced centrifuges. It has increased both the enrichment level of its uranium stock and the size of its stock itself. And more immediately, Iran and its proxies continue to directly threaten Israel and US interests in Iraq and Syria. I have been clear that I don't think a return to the JCPOA is sufficient to constrain Iran's malign activity. And increasingly, I don't even know how it's possible when Iran is so far out of compliance. The fact remains, we cannot isolate Iran alone. We need a comprehensive strategy, one backed with international sanctions that our allies are willing to enforce, and one that constrains Iran's malign regional behavior and its ballistic missile program. Before we turn to questions, and I'll hang in there as long as I can, Jack, as both are calling me to the floor about keeping the government open. Let me also spend some time on the other major issue the American Jewish Congress continues to lead on, and that's combating anti-Semitism. Whether it be the rise of white nationalist hate groups here at home and abroad, or the anti-Semitic driven bias we regularly see against Israel at the UN and other international institutions. I strongly believe that the United States must have a seat at the table at these institutions that refuse to condemn, for example, the barbaric slaughter of Syrian children, yet are more focused on denying Israel's right to self-defense. And here at home, I don't have to tell you about the rise of anti-Semitism we see in our country, which is incredibly alarming to me. New Jersey is home to a proud and vibrant Jewish community, and yet we've tragically witnessed a devastating surge in hate crimes, including a deadly shooting at a kosher grocery in Jersey City. a stark reminder of why I'm committed to delivering to our Jewish communities and other religious minorities the nonprofit security funding they need to worship without fear. And it is no surprise to any of us that many of the insurrectionists who attacked our capital on January 6th preached anti-Semitic hate. While the insurrection was first and foremost an assault against our democracy, it was fueled by the exact hatred that drives violent white supremacism. The rioters wore anti-Semitic symbols and slogans like 6MWE, 6 million wasn't enough. They waved the Confederate flag in the halls of Congress, beat Capitol police officers with the American flag, and tried to overturn an election. It was a dark day and a powerful reminder that we cannot take any of the progress we've made for granted. The work of building a more just and inclusive society, a more perfect union, is certainly ongoing. Fortunately, I believe more Americans are united in the struggle against white supremacy than are for it. I have long admired the Jewish community's commitment to building a more tolerant, more just, and more equal nation. You are a force for good in this country and in the world. And in me, you'll always have a friend and ally. With that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I forgot to mention one of the attributes of the senator, which shocked me, was my birthday was a few weeks ago. And I get this call with someone with a wonderful voice singing happy birthday to me. I thought it was either a hoax or my wife paid somebody to sing a great birthday song to me. And I find out it's Senator Menendez. I didn't believe him at first, but he could have a career at the Philharmonic. So if any of you want to enjoy a great happy birthday song to yourself, send your birthdays to the senator's office and maybe I'll have a chance to sing to you. Anyway,
Jack,
thank you.
I like to eat, so I'm not giving up my day job. So
Anyway, so Senator, one of the things that has been on every American's mind and for many years now is Iran's nuclear proliferation. We know that the president and you and others are trying to find a diplomatic solution to their nuclear development program. But it looks like it is stalled. What if the diplomacy doesn't work? What is, as has been the case, sanctions don't work. And Iran gets very close or, does have a breakout in the nuclear program. What does America do? We do know our options, but what option would you recommend America take at that point? Or do we just allow Iran to become another North Korea?
no, I certainly do not ascribe into allowing that to happen. Look, I think, Jack, this is the key question before this administration, and for that fact, the Congress. Now, I don't believe the only option is a military one, because as we have seen, even when some actions that are quasi-military have taken place, they have set back the program for a time period. They have not eliminated the program. And the other reality is that Iran, from the first set of attacks that took place in the past, learned to deepen and harden their and diversify their overall program. So it's just not an anti-Semitic single attack that is going to eliminate the program, and it isn't without consequences for Israel through all of the proxies, and for that fact, the United States and its interests in the region. So it's a deeply, deeply complicated challenge. One of the things that if we got to that point, we have already failed. And it's my mind that, as I have said to the administration, the mere fact that you were willing to consider getting into a new JCPOA, which the administration has used the term stronger and longer, I can envision something that I could support that is truly stronger and longer, but I'd have to see what that is. That should take our allies and now create a more comprehensive ability to multilateralize effective and enforced sanctions, they would have a real challenge to Iran, especially at a critical time in which they are already suffering with an economy that is deeply troubled, and with COVID as another element of that reality. So if the Iranians are unwilling to even come back to the table, it's my argument to the administration that that's your green light to say to all of those allies that were reticent to do anything because we walked away from it while they were still in it, that, hey, they haven't shown any willingness to do it. They keep advancing. We don't even really know. We have estimates. But the IAEA recently, made this declaration that they came to an agreement. It's an agreement of walking in the blind. All they did is take out the chips that were previously being used to monitor their program, but which they didn't get to see, and replace them with a new set of chips to continue to monitor the program, which they still don't get to see. So we still don't know exactly what Iran has advanced to. We have our estimates and intelligence analysis, but we don't know with the certainty that we had under the JCPOA monitoring agreement, which is the one good thing that came out of that. So at the end of the day, I think this is a time to multilateralize our efforts because they have shown their unwillingness to return. Raisi obviously is one of the most hardline you could have. He's probably the next Ayatollah. And so this is the time to try that tactic, because if you do that and you still don't stop, then you have, I think, a greater foundation for a military option should you need it.
Thank you. So the first question is from Dr. Ben Choak. If he got on, he might be a little bit late. Ben, are you there? All right, we'll try him back afterwards. So let's take a question from Zev Rubinstein. Zev is one of the senior managers at the Israeli bonds. He worked for us at the American Jewish Congress for a while, many years ago. He is an American today, but he's spent many years in Israel and knows everybody. So Zev, do you have a question?
Knows everybody, not like you, Jack Rosen. Sorry, I still have to reborn to be like you. Senator, good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us. You have a very big, important place in my heart, like many, many Israelis, because you stood for the state of Israel and the Jewish people all the time. Your hair maybe changed white, but you, in your heart, didn't change the bit. And I appreciate and salute you for that. Senator, we are going through difficult times. We have a Democratic party with two anti-Semites in it that nobody from Biden down is doing anything about it. Biden ran away from Afghanistan, leaving your people there behind, which create a very mistrust between the state of Israel, people of Israel, and the Arab nations. We don't see too much of a fight against anti-Semites. Words are very nice, but as we say in French, tachlis is not happening. What can you do as a strong senator to bring the Democratic Party back on track? Because otherwise, I think even the Jewish people will wake up to understand that something bad is happening. And again, I salute you and thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rubinstein, and I appreciate your comments. Let me make a few reflections. Number one is, I have been to the Knesset in Israel, and it is a very, can be very fractious in its democratic process of trying to find out the best pathway for Israel on this whole host of issues, both domestically and externally. And so in a democracy, there are different voices. The question is, overwhelmingly, the Democratic Party is in support of a strong, unwavering relationship with the state of Israel. It is in every vote, not what a few people say, because sometimes in our society, the loudest voices get the most attention, even though they are in the abject minority. The reality is that in every single vote, which is the ultimate judgment, look at the votes in the votes on Iron Dome, in the votes on the biggest memorandum of understanding ever signed between the United States and Israel, on the questions of anti-Semitism, on the BDS movement, across the spectrum, overwhelmingly Democratic votes in almost, at least in the Senate, in almost their totality, if not their totality, and in overwhelmingly in the House of Representatives have been there. Those are the ultimate judgment questions, because those are the things that make a difference for our relationship with the state of Israel and Israel's right to exist. So I say, look at that versus the rhetoric, number one. Number two, I think President Biden acted very well when Israel was faced with the Palestinian uprising and ultimately had to defend itself. And I think President Biden stood strong to defend itself, despite incredible pressure from many different quarters, both at home and abroad, to seek to end it before Israel could complete its defensive mission. So I think that that's a very strong statement. The administration has greenlighted $1 billion to replace Iron Dome. I mean, these are the ultimate measurements I think that one needs to take. As it relates to Afghanistan, let us not forget that before President Biden took office, President Trump signed what I've called a surrender deal. He ultimately told the Taliban that we would get out by a date certain, which we have always, not liked date certains, to give our enemy a green light, wait until now, and then you can do what you want. He gave them a date certain. He returned 5,000 Taliban soldiers that were imprisoned. As part of the deal, he released them to the Taliban. That strengthened their numbers. And he brought down our overall force to only 2,500 when it was several thousand more. This has all happened before President Biden took the oath of office on January 20th of this year. And so I don't ultimately, I understand the president's decision, because if after 20 years of commitment, thousands of American lives lost, and $2 trillion, the Afghans aren't willing to fight for their own country. I cannot fight for you for eternity. You have to be willing, as Israelis are, to fight for their own country. And so that's the reality. I say we had a long-term commitment to both Democratic and Republican administrations, but when he pulled the trigger, I think that what happened in some degree is a justification. If we had continued there, we never would have built either a government or a military that was willing to fight for. I can pay you and you can look at it as a job, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the passion to fight and maybe die for your country, then I can never ultimately replace that. Having said that, I do think the execution of the decision was flawed, and I said that, and I had a hearing on it. So I am equally calibrated in terms of my praise and my criticism, regardless of who sits in office. But I think in fairness, you have to look at the totality to understand that there is a strong, unwavering support in the Democratic Party, regardless of the few voices, for our relationship with the state of Israel.
Thank you, Senator. Next question is from Tonio Burgos.
Tonio Burgos, how did he get himself into the American Jewish Congress?
Tonio he's all things in politics and all things in religion. He doesn't.
I love Tonio.
Tonio, are you on?
You have to unmute yourself, Tonio.
Tonio, unmute yourself.
Which has never been a problem.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I have to
Senator.
introduce
Thank
him
you,
to you.
Mr. Chairman.
But
But
Tonio, time is critical. Can you keep the question short?
but Jack, I feel an obligation to say one thing before I ask my senator the question. My senator, the fella that said that the Democratic Party is anti-Semitic, The Democratic Party as an institution is not anti-Semitic. We have fought anti-Semitism for many, many decades. There are, like in any political party, a few stray apples that are not totally enlightened. So I couldn't let this go without responding to that as a proud Democrat and as an officer of the Democratic National Committee. So to your call of that, I wanted to say that. My question is to the chairman, and as I said, my senator, when you took the oath of office in January of '93, did you believe that a month later, as a member of Congress, you'd see the first terrorist attack on the grounds of the United States? 20 years later, a few years before you joined the Senate, we saw the same thing on 9/11. And it was the same thing, lack of communication amongst each other of the agencies that were pertinent to this. We are now in a new phase called domestic terrorism. And I hope that you and your mantle as chair and your colleagues are looking at ways to ensure that the communication between our intelligence agencies are functioning the way they should be, because domestic terrorism as of January 6th has really, really become a real problem.
Well, thank you, Tonio, and thank you for your leadership and participation in so many important causes. And I'm glad to call you a friend and certainly one of my constituents in New Jersey. Look, domestic terrorism is a far bigger challenge than many people will accept and realize. The assault on the Capitol by insurrectionists, as I said, who had anti-Semitic slogans and wore them as well, is the ultimate vivid example of that challenge. And I have brought to bear, both in that case as well as obviously what happened in Afghanistan, that, you know, we in the post-September 11th world worked very hard to have an intelligence systems that shared and integrated their information with each other, understood that the only ground that they should be fighting for is the collective ground beneath our feet. And now I see domestically the challenge, and I also saw in Afghanistan a bit of a challenge, where we have to revisit what we did 20 years ago and say, hey, what is going wrong that you were unable to identify and or communicate, if there are some agencies that may have identified, in a way that created a protection here at home and in a way that gave us a more informed decision in Afghanistan. So you hit the nail on the head, and it is something we're very much engaged with. Mark Warner, who is the chair of the Intelligence Committee, and I have joined together in this effort, and we look forward to fine-tuning it so we don't have a risk again.
So Senator, I know you're short on time. We'll take one more question and then turn it over to Joe Rubin for closing remarks. Unless you have time, we're willing to stay here.
I'm already late for the next vote on the floor.
So let me call on Dr. Ben Choak. Dr. Ben, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you go. Okay. Please keep the questions on the short side because Senator is late.
Okay, that's fine. All right, I'm here in the front lines and wearing my flak jacket for micro bullets.
I should have brought my construction outfit.
Yeah, well. So I hear what you're saying about the, obviously the number one issue on our minds is Iran, because that's an existential threat to the United States, all our allies in the region, and specifically also Israel. And as we've discussed in the past, they're becoming extremely close to being capable of producing a nuclear weapon, and are clear in their intention to destroy the people that they don't want around. And Israel's one of them, and the Sunni nations are one of them, and of course we're the big devil in America. The Biden administration is clearly focused on this, and they're focusing on a diplomatic solution first. What is of some concern is that there's a lot of balls in the air right now. The Afghanistan withdrawal, created some controversy. No matter whose opinion or whose fault you want to put there, right now the administration is receiving flack from it. General Miley's receiving criticism for his calls to China. It just feels like, you know, they are a little bit distracted from that specific issue at this time. And I wonder, how can we be helpful? How can you be helpful in terms of helping them get refocused? Because there are a lot of problems, and there's always going to be a lot of criticism, no matter what you do and no matter what decision you take. But the job of the commander-in-chief is to have the safety and security of America and its allies at present. So what can we do to get them refocused? What can you do? Clearly you're doing everything you can do. I'm confident of that. But what is your counsel to us?
Well, thank you, Doc, and thank you for your incredible advocacy in this regard. Look, I appreciate the question, and I am somewhat concerned about in a world that is probably the confluence of global events that is challenging us is unlike any that I've seen in the 30 years that I have been practicing foreign policy between the House and the Senate. So it's a lot out there. You mentioned some. We have North Korea. We have Venezuela in our own hemisphere. Of course, we have the most significant challenge with China. We have Russia still doing things. There's a lot of stuff out there. So one of the things that I am doing is getting the Secretary of State, and I've had conversations with him to focus in on this question. Also, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who plays a major role here, saying you've got to focus in on this question. Senator Graham and I have a proposal, which I've shared with some of you in the past, about creating a nuclear fuel bank and inviting not only Iran, but others in the region to join it as a way to stop a race for nuclear power and nuclear weapons, and also to challenge Iran. If you want to have nuclear energy for domestic energy consumption, there is a way to do it. If you want isotopes for medical research, there's a way to do it. And to create another opportunity to test the proposition, most particularly for our allies, is Iran truly interested in doing something? That also creates an attention. Then finally, we are in the midst of preparing an Iran hearing, because I believe that hearings are a way to focus attention and get answers. And, I hope we will be able to line it up in a relatively short period of time. So, so those are all the things that I'm trying to do to get attention on this. I know that there has been good conversations between the new Israeli government and the administration on this. There's a lot of going back and forth, including in intelligence and in defense elements, which are important, and a way to ratchet up the question. And then finally, I just believe that when you all advocate with your respective members of Congress and members of the Senate, that making this, it's very easy to go in, because there are so many challenges, and talk about BDS, and talk about Iron Dome, and talk about Hezbollah and the challenges. But I think this particular issue at this particular time needs a singular attention and a singular focus of advocacy, without mentioning the other things, even though the other things are equally as important. But in order to drive the attention in a way that gets a considered plan, I think that would be the one thing I think you would all do.
Thank you, Senator. Let me turn it over to Joel Rubin. He'll make his closing remarks. Joel is the Executive Director of American Jewish Congress. I don't know if the two of you had a chance to meet, but he's a Washingtonian, and I hope you have time to meet with him sometime. Go ahead, Joel.
Hey, thanks, Jack. And thank you, Senator, for your leadership and for your generous time today as well, and giving us extra time. I wanted to also note quickly before you depart about your vision early on in identifying the international links of white supremacist terrorism, domestic terrorism, linking to that, and leading with Max Rose, who's on our advisory board to counter domestic terrorism and white supremacy on legislation to try to combat that. So thank you for that, and for all of your strong advocacy over the years. And to everybody on the call as well, thank you for joining us, for participating, for sending in your questions. We're excited about this, and we're excited about doing more webinars of this nature, and really appreciate the Jewish community coming out today to hear Senator Menendez's points. And with that, Jack, thank you for moderating, and we will be in touch.
All
Thank
right,
you, Senator. Thank you
everybody,
so much.
take care, Jack.